I knew enough about Home Depot to know that their regular contractor customers could treat themselves. Weber helped himself and stood sipping his drink while he chatted with one of the salesmen behind the counter. Watching Mr. Weber, I realized one thing: not only did he have sex with my wife and make her pregnant, but he also chewed gum with his mouth open. Other than spitting on the sidewalk, I couldn't think of anything more disgusting. Some temporary duty assignments, or TDYs, can be fun and exciting, but this one was not. It was 30 days of almost round-the-clock hard work. Every year, the U.S. Army participates in the Rapid Deployment Exercise. Several units from across the Army are selected to participate, and are airlifted with all their equipment to Germany, where they engage in a month-long exercise with their NATO counterparts. My name is Fred Sadler. At the time, I was a relatively new captain in the U.S. Army, working in the Operations Division stationed at Fort Hood, Texas. This deployment came at the worst possible time for me to be anywhere other than home with my wife because she was pregnant, and the baby was due sometime during this deployment. I tried to get out of the service, but the Army would not accept the decision. Lydia and I were married for almost 6 years, most of them were good. The bad ones happened when I had to go away on a business trip, and she stayed home. Lydia and I were not lovers or lifelong friends. We met at the DMV one day when I was registering my car, and she was renewing her license. We sat next to each other and waited for our numbers to be called, and started chatting. One thing led to another, and pretty soon we exchanged phone numbers. A week later, we had our first date, and a month after that, we had our first night together. Lydia wasn't an enthusiastic beauty, but she had a classic look that made my insides turn upside down. She could just look at me, and my heart would melt. Her body was classic too. Most men looked at any woman with a beautiful body, and I watched men and women stare at her as she walked by. At first, I felt proud watching them stare at her, but eventually, it got tiresome. I began to think of them as leeches, thinking of her only as a sexual object. I realized that was something I had to accept. Lydia, on the other hand, took it all calmly. "Let them look, honey," she said. "It's no big deal. As they say, it's okay to look, but it's better not to touch." You bet they better not touch each other, I thought. Every time she said that, she worked very hard to make her body look the way it does now. I was helping her. We spent 3 nights a week at the gym, running in the park, hiking. We even watched our diet. I'd forgotten the last time I'd eaten red meat. Watching her get dressed, or better yet, undressed, was always fascinating to me. Every time she carelessly threw off her clothes, exposing some of her bare skin, my heart raced, and I never got tired of it. When the deployment began, I heard my commanding officer say, "I give you a personal guarantee that I will do everything in my power to get you home before the baby is born." And he did. He arranged for me to be on the first plane back to the States at the end of the exercise. I packed my things and was about to get on a plane. I called Lydia, who told me that she thought she was going to be hospitalized in the next couple of days. "Then the timing must be perfect because I'm on my way home," I told her. We ended the conversation with "I love you." It was dusk, I was driving to the airport, and a deer ran out into the road in front of us. My driver swerved to avoid it, and the next thing I knew, I woke up in a military hospital in Frankfurt. My right arm, right leg, 3 ribs on my side were broken, and my right lung had collapsed. I was so stupefied that I did not realize who or where I was. As I began to clear up a little, I started asking questions. "How long have I been here?" I asked my nurse. "5 days. Is my wife here?" "No, sir." "Where is she?" "She wasn't here, sir, but your commander notified her just after you arrived, so she knows what happened." "Where's my phone?" "She found it among my personal belongings, and I called Lydia." "Are you okay?" were her first words. "Don't mind me, how are you and the baby?" She began to cry. "We lost the baby, baby Fred. I'm so sorry." I was too stunned to speak. Finally, I asked, "Are you okay?" "I think so, yes. I'm home, but they don't want me traveling, or I'd be with you." "What's wrong?" I asked. No one knows for sure. Everything seemed to be fine until I heard one of the nurses say, "Oh, oh," and then everyone got excited. "I still don't understand anything," I said, but they tried to explain that it was something with the umbilical cord. "Are you sure you're okay?" I asked. There was a long silence as we both struggled with our thoughts and emotions. Physically, I'm fine, but emotionally I'm a mess. "When are you coming home?" "I don't know, they didn't give me any ideas." "Do you want me to try to come over?" "No, no, stay there and take care of yourself." 2 weeks later, I was flown home on a medical airplane. Lydia met me and traveled with me to Fort Hood Hospital. She was still an emotional wreck, but our time together seemed to help us both. I asked her if she had named the baby. Yes, I named her Hope. At those words, we both cried. I was in the hospital for another 2 weeks before I was discharged on limited duty. Limited duty usually meant that you didn't have to go into the field and train. This would be very difficult because my arm and leg were still in casts. It took a few more weeks before they were taken off. Time passed and everything was going smoothly in both our marriage and my career. 2 years after we lost a child, we were transferred to Heidelberg, Germany. We spent 3 years there, traveling all over Europe. There, I was promoted to major. After 3 years, we were transferred to Fort Lewis, Washington. Being a major, we were given field grade officers' quarters. They were much nicer than company grade, and they had garages, not just carports. Company grade meant second lieutenant, first lieutenant, and captain. Field grade included majors and above. When we moved into the cabin in Lewis, all the things we took with us to Germany were sent back. We unpacked those boxes as well as the boxes we had stored and did not take with us. The boxes were stacked in each room. Lydia went to the officer club to attend a pledge meeting. There she could meet other wives and make new friendships. While she was gone, I stayed in our cabin, unpacking and organizing things. Using a box cutter, I opened one of the many boxes and began to take things out of it. It was the box we had stored things in while we were in Germany. About halfway down was a small wooden box that I didn't remember seeing before. I placed it on top of the stack of boxes and opened it. My life changed forever. There was a small stack of envelopes with a pink ribbon around it. I pulled the ribbon away and picked up the top envelope. It was unsealed, and I opened it. Inside was an official document labeled birth certificate. As I looked at the document, my mind began to fog up. It stated that a baby girl weighing 7 pounds 6 ounces and 19 inches long was born alive, and it included the date. It was the same date Lydia had told me our baby was stillborn. The baby was named Hope. It went on to say that the mother's name was Lydia Jane Sadler and Johnston. Where the father's name was listed, there was a note that said unknown. At the bottom of the certificate were 2 small inked footprints. Staggering, I literally fell on the couch and stared at the document for a long time. I left it on the couch, stood up, and walked over to the stack of envelopes. I picked up the next envelope, it too was unsealed. I pulled out a multi-page document. It was an adoption certificate. I read it several times. The gist of it was that a child named Hope, born to Lydia Sadler, had been given up for adoption and stripped of all parental rights. It went on to say that since the identity of the biological father is unknown, his permission is not required. It also stated that the name and location of the Foster family must remain confidential, and absolutely no contact between the Foster family and Mrs. Sadler was allowed. I looked through the rest of the packet, and it was mostly letters from me. I was in total shock. This had to be the biggest lie in the history of lies. I couldn't stop asking questions. This kind of thing doesn't happen overnight, it has to be planned, or so I thought. If she thought I was coming for the birth, then did that mean she was already planning the adoption? Father unknown. If I wasn't the father, then who was? Obviously, even she didn't know. We were married for 6 years, how many men had she slept with in that time? Did she know it made me feel uncomfortable? I managed to regain my composure, to put everything back in its proper place. I even repacked and taped up the box that contained everything. It was as I was taping up the box that I saw the inscription Lydia's papers and childhood memories written in magic marker on all 4 sides. If I had seen that, I definitely wouldn't have opened it. She had to know that even in marriage, we need personal space and thoughts. I rearranged a few other boxes and put the box among them, trying to pretend I hadn't seen it. I went outside to sit on the back deck and get some fresh air because I was stuffy inside. What am I supposed to do now? How do I even talk about it? I was at a loss. There was no thought in my head about where to go or how to get there. I needed advice. If I went to my parents, they would explode and try to kill Lydia. I was their only child and therefore their only hope. I realized the irony, hope for a grandchild. I could have gone to her parents, but that prospect didn't inspire confidence. We had no close friends, the military moves and meeting different people were hard on both family and friendship. I was still there when she got home, she found me on the street. "Hi sweetie," she kissed my cheek. "How much have you gotten done?" "Enough," I said rather abruptly. I was rarely brief or curt when talking to her, so I could feel her looking down at me. She stayed there for a few more minutes before going inside. It must have been another hour before I entered the house. The box with Lydia's papers and childhood memories was gone. "We have been invited to meet at the welcome wagon on Saturday," she said. "Good, the Simpsons from Heidelberg are here. Do you remember them?" "Not really," I replied. He was a G2 major, and I played bridge with her. Their names were Jim and Fran. "Oh yes, I remember," she walked over to me. "Are you okay? Did something happen? Is something wrong?" I thought, you bet there's something wrong, and I intend to find out what it is. "No, I'm just a little out of sorts today, I guess." "Okay, what would you like for dinner? Or would you prefer to go to the officers' club?" "I'm not hungry, I think I'll lie down," I said. I did, fully clothed, on our bed. Sometime before she joined me, I fell asleep. It must have been late because when I looked at the clock, I was still awake at 1 o'clock in the morning. I slept until 9 o'clock, which rarely happened to me. I took a shower and went downstairs. She made coffee as she was supposed to. "Breakfast?" she asked. "No thanks, just coffee, another rarity. I usually had a full breakfast." She sat down across from me. "Okay, there's something wrong. Tell me, and maybe I can help." "I just have a lot to think about," I said, got up, took my coffee to the sink, poured it, and headed for the garage. "You know I'm here when you need me," she said as I left. I drove up to the golf course, parked the car, and headed to the 19th hole, where there was a bar, diner, and restaurant at the end of the golf course. I ordered 2 eggs over medium and corned beef hash. I even had a rare cup of decaf coffee. This used to be my favorite breakfast until Lydia changed my eating habits. Beef in any form or name was an absolute no-no for her, but I ordered it anyway. I managed to eat most of it and sat on the deck while the golfers finished the 18th hole and went inside. When I got home, it was the middle of the day. She had made a lot of progress in taking down boxes and organizing the house. I looked around and wondered what it would be like to have a 5-year-old daughter running around. I barely made it to the bathroom before I lost my scrambled eggs and hash browns. I was still dipping my head into the dresser when I felt her hand on my back. Suddenly, I hated her. "Get off me!" I almost shouted before I threw my head back and lost more of my breakfast. I hadn't thrown up in years, not since I got drunk at my high school prom. When I finished, I went upstairs, rinsed my mouth, and brushed my teeth. She was sitting in the living room with a napkin in her hand. She looked like she'd been crying. She watched me walk past her and head into the garage again. I was backing up when she appeared in the rearview mirror. "I can't help you if I don't know what's wrong," she said as I continued to back away. She saw that I wasn't going to stop, and she moved from the spot. I went to my unit and entered the office. There was no one there except the officer on duty. I sat down at my desk and tried to work, but my heart wasn't in it. When I got home, it was past midnight. She was lying in bed reading. I undressed and took a shower. "I'll sleep downstairs," I announced as I walked out and closed the door. I had just turned on the TV and was getting comfortable on the couch when she walked in, grabbed the remote, turned off the TV, and stared at me. "Cut the crap. Tell me what's wrong, and I'll either help you or leave. Which is it?" "I haven't done anything wrong, so I won't tolerate you yelling at me when I'm trying to help or having to get out of your way when you try to run me down," I said, walking over to her, taking the remote from her hands, and turning the TV back on. "Have a safe trip," I said as she left less than an hour later. We had never talked to each other like that, and she had never threatened to leave, let alone actually do so. I got up and started looking for the box. I found it in the basement under some other boxes. I opened it and found a small wooden box. I pulled out the birth certificate and adoption papers, made copies of them, and put everything back where it belonged. Since she was gone, I slept in our bed. On Monday morning, I talked to my commander and told him my story. I even showed him the documents. He was as dumbfounded as I was. I had been under his command for less than a month, so I hadn't really gotten used to it yet. He was probably worried that he had a loser on his hands. "What do you plan to do?" he asked me. "I'm not sure." "Did she say where she was going when she left?" I replied. "No, sir, but she didn't take all her things, especially the box," I said. There was a pause before I spoke again. "I was thinking of trying to find my daughter, if she is my daughter, and proceed from there. It would be virtually impossible in adoption cases. Confidentiality is very important to both parties," he said. "I understand, but I have to do something. I have to start somewhere, and I don't trust her to tell me the truth anymore," I said. Then, I literally jumped up. "Oh my God, I have an idea. Can I have the day off?" "Sure," he said. I saluted and ran out of his office and building and into the parking lot, where I jumped in my car and drove home. I opened the box, pulled out a wooden box, and dumped the contents on the floor. There was a pacifier in there. A pacifier Hope must have used before she was taken. I put the box back together, put the pacifier in a clear plastic bag, and sealed it. I got on the internet, trying to find a DNA lab in the area. There was one in downtown Seattle. I went into the bathroom, but all of Lydia's things were gone. I rummaged through the cabinet under the sink, found her old hairbrush, put it in another plastic bag along with the bag that held the pacifier, and hauled ass to Seattle. I held out a pacifier to the technician, whose name was Margie, and she looked at it. "It's been a long time," so there may not be any DNA left on it, but we can try, she said. She looked at the comb and pulled a few hairs out of it. There should be no problem with that, she said. Then she asked me to spit in the bottle. We'll call you in about 3 weeks, she said. I went back to Fort Lewis and home. I didn't hear from Lydia for another whole day. Hi, I said. Are you feeling better? Better than what? She replied. Better than the crap you were a couple of days ago. No, same old crap. So, it's still not safe for me to go home. No, it isn't. Try again in 3 weeks. Why 3 weeks exactly? By then, I should know if I'm going to kill you or just divorce you, she said. I ended the conversation. The phone immediately rang, and I ignored it. The next day, when I got home, Lydia was already there. She met my car as I pulled up to the house. She was furious. What do you mean you're going to either kill me or divorce me? She demanded. Exactly what I said. I think I deserve an explanation, I replied. Me too. About what? She asked. We were still in the driveway. Not that we were yelling, but we certainly weren't behaving the way an army officer and his wife are supposed to behave. You mean you don't need to explain anything? I asked. That's exactly what I'm talking about. So there's no hope for us? I said, putting as much emphasis as possible on the word hope. What do you mean there's no hope for us? What have I done? Then it hit her. Oh my God, no, please no. I'll be back in an hour, and you'd better not be here. I'll leave for work in the morning at 6:30. I'll be back at 5. By then, all your stuff should be out of this house. I left. I came back exactly an hour later, and she was gone, along with the box and some of her things. She tried to call that night, but after the first call, I blocked her number. The rest of the night passed quietly. At exactly 6:30 a.m., I was in the car, opening the garage door. There was Lydia, standing in the rearview mirror again. I slowly backed up. It was very tempting to hit her, but I resisted. Can we at least talk? She asked as I continued in reverse. I didn't answer. A van was parked outside with 3 men sitting in the cab. I was already halfway there, and the car was still moving. I saw the men get out of the truck, run up to her, and pull her out from behind my car. I didn't know whether to be happy or sad that they had done that. When I got home in the evening, the house was almost empty. She had picked out almost all the furniture and taken it away. True, she left my favorite chair and a bedroom set for guests. She also left the everyday dishes and a few pots and pans. She took the good silver and china, and other nonsense that I didn't care about. The next morning, I called my office to let them know I would be late. I then called Post Housing and arranged for government furniture to be temporarily brought to my apartment. I also called the credit union, our stockbroker, the insurance company, and anyone else I could think of, and went about those mundane housekeeping things that are usually associated with divorce. I then made an appointment with a JAG, Judge Advocate General, Army lawyer. I knew they were not authorized to represent me in civilian court, but they could advise me. They confirmed what I suspected, she would get half. We lived in public housing, so we didn't own a house, but we had enough equity to buy one if we wanted to. Both our cars were paid off. We bought them in Germany, much cheaper than we would have paid in the States for the same cars. I went to my office, my commanding officer talked to me for a while and told me to take whatever reasonable time I needed to get myself in shape and keep him informed of my progress or lack thereof. My life continued for a couple more weeks. I went to work, did my chores, mowed the lawn, washed and cleaned my car. One morning, the phone rang. Hello. I answered. Is that Major Fred Sadler? It is Major Sadler. This is Margie from the DNA Analysis Center. A few weeks ago, you gave us some samples to test. Yes, it is. Well, the results are in, and you can come in and look at them. Can't you just tell me now? No, sir, I can't. We can either mail them to the address you gave us or show them to you in person. We have no way to verify over the phone that you are who you say you are. We have to see identification. We can mail the results because, as you may recall, we asked you for ID when you were here, and we were able to verify your address. I'll be there as soon as I can. I walked through their door, introduced myself, and asked to see Margie. She came out, and we shook hands. She asked to see my identification. Come with me, please, she said. I followed her into a small room. She asked me to wait. She left and came back a couple of minutes later. She handed me a pacifier and then spoke. Sample A is yours. Sample B is from the hair you gave us, and sample C is from the pacifier. We were able to determine that samples B and C are positively related. Sample A is not related to either B or C. Thanks, I said, took the pacifier, put it in my pocket, took the papers, and left. I got into my car. At least I didn't have a daughter calling some other man daddy, but someone else did. JAG was not authorized to recommend specific law firms or attorneys, but the JAG officer I spoke with was able to provide me with a list of approved attorneys and firms. The next day, I started calling them. I made 6 appointments. At the 3rd appointment, I found my man. He was a retired JAG officer and hated cheating spouses, both wife and husband. I spent over an hour telling him my story. 45 years I've been practicing law, and this is the most diabolically unprincipled case of selfishness I've ever seen. She must have ice water in her veins where there should be blood. Too bad the courts here almost always side with the wife regardless of the circumstances of the divorce. I can almost guarantee that they will side with your wife in this case as well. It's almost as if they feel they have to take the husband down no matter how innocent he is. When I got home, it was late. There was a letter in the mailbox. It was from Lydia. Fred, 3 weeks are up, Lydia, short and to the point. The return address was her parents' address in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. I called her. Hi, Fred, she said. I won't talk about it over the phone, and I'm certainly not flying to Pennsylvania, so I guess you'll have to come here. If you mean Seattle, I'm already here. I sent a letter last week when I was there. I'll be at the house at 6:30, come over then, I told her. She hung up. I didn't make any special arrangements, no drinks, no cheese, no crackers. Nothing. This was supposed to be a business meeting. I put the DNA documents and my copies of the birth certificate and adoption papers on the government-issued coffee table. She pulled up to the driveway at 6:20 but waited until exactly 6:30 to ring the bell. I was in no hurry to answer it. Opening the door, I invited her in and then indicated where she should sit. I sat on the couch, she sat in the uncomfortable straight-back chair across from me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a pacifier and held it out to her. She grabbed it and held it to her breast. Thank you, she said, as if I'd given her $1 million. Then I handed her a copy of the DNA test results. You already know I'm not the father, but this will confirm it. She reached for the results and took them with her left hand. The pacifier remained clutched in her right. I take it you are sample A, she asked. Yes, then I pushed the rest of the papers toward her without saying anything. She leaned forward, read the title on the top sheet, and tears welled up in her eyes. She set the DNA test results aside and picked up the dissolution of marriage application. She started to read it, But the tears were already flowing freely and falling onto the form, so she set it aside. She rummaged through her pockets looking for a napkin but couldn't find one. "Can I have a tissue?" she asked. "I don't have any." That was a lie because there was a box on the nightstand by the couch where I was sitting. She saw them and just stared at me. I didn't move. "You're not making it easy for me, are you?" she asked. "You cheated," I said. She nodded. "How many times?" I asked. "Does it matter?" "No, I just want to know." "One weekend? Different men?" "Just one." "Who is he?" "Then again, does it really matter?" "Again, I just want to know." "I think I deserve it." "I'm not going to tell you." "Do I know him?" "I'm not going to tell you." "So you'd rather protect him than try to save your marriage?" She picked up the divorce petition. "Our marriage is over anyway, why ruin it?" "Okay, but you have to tell me why you lied about your daughter being stillborn." It was a statement, not a question. "Yes, I owe you one." She stood up, pulled out a box of tissues, and placed it in front of her. She took one and wiped her still wet eyes. She was still clutching her pacifier. "When I found out I was pregnant, I wasn't sure if it was your baby or his. I thought about getting an abortion, but I couldn't. Over time, I was able to reason that you can't know for sure if it's your baby or not. When we found out it was going to be a girl, I was even more sure you wouldn't know because there is a special bond between dad and daughter, and I was sure you and her would look alike. As the time of her birth approached, I started to get nervous. Maybe you would find out she wasn't yours. Then you went away on a business trip, and my nerves calmed down a bit. I was glad you wouldn't be around when she was born. Then you told me you were flying home, and I started to get nervous again. My emotions have been on a roller coaster. Maybe you'll know, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll be there when she's born, maybe you won't. I was nervous. Then she was there, alive and perfect. She was placed on my chest, and I looked at her and fell in love. She was beautiful. She had blonde hair and blue eyes. Blonde hair and blue eyes, she paused, just like her father's. You have brown hair and brown eyes. No one in our families has blonde hair and blue eyes. I knew she wasn't yours. She was my daughter, and you were my husband. I loved you both, but I knew I had to choose between you. I chose you. The hospital staff helped me when I told them I wanted to give her up for adoption within 24 hours. I had the papers in my hands. They asked who the baby's father was, and I said I didn't know. They said it would be easier that way because if I knew who the father was, they would have to get his permission. I just breastfed her and held her in my arms. She was sucking on a pacifier when they brought me the papers to sign. At this point, she started crying again. They took her away from me so I could sign. I signed and reached out to take her back. The nurse said, "You can't take her back, she's not yours anymore." I reached for her anyway but managed to grab the pacifier before they left with her. I never saw her again. The 2 pictures I managed to take with my phone, that pacifier, and her birth certificate are all I have of her now. She was sobbing. "Lord, forgive me. I want my daughter back." I sat and watched her cry for a long time before I brought her a glass of water. "Thank you," she said. I sat back down. It took her a long time to calm down. "I knew I had to tell you something, so I made up the lie that she was stillborn and was cremated. When you came home, I couldn't believe you didn't ask to see the birth certificate, death certificate, or anything else. I still can't believe it. I trusted you," I said. "I had no reason not to trust you. Besides, It was so traumatic that I saw no reason to add to our suffering by looking at those pieces of paper, she continued. Eventually, you and I got our lives back to normal, and I was almost happy. But a part of me was missing. It still is, and it gets worse every year on her birthday. I always took the time to pull out her birth certificate, touch her little footprints, and hold her pacifier. There were times when I wanted to put it in my mouth to feel closer to her, but it had some of my dried breast milk on it, and I wanted to preserve it, so I didn't. At this point, she wanted to show it to me, but it was gone. They must have scraped it off at the DNA lab. Oh my God, it's gone, she groaned, then looked at me. It's gone. Her milk is gone. You bastard, you took her milk. She fell to her knees and literally curled up in a ball on the floor. She wouldn't stop howling. I picked her up and put her on the couch. I couldn't let her leave in that condition, so I covered her with a blanket and went to my bedroom. But not to bed. She remained there for several hours. At midnight, I heard the toilet flush. I went downstairs, she was sitting on the couch. Would you like some coffee? I asked. Yes, please, she said. She sat down at the counter while I brewed her a cup. She took a sip. I guess I got a little cold feet, huh? Sort of, she replied. We sat in silence and drank coffee. More? I asked. Yes, please, she replied. Where are you staying? I asked, brewing 2 more cups. At the motel. You were there for more than 3 weeks. No, I was with my parents most of the time. Do they know the truth? No, I lied to them too. I told them that you and I were going through a difficult time, and I needed to get away from you for a while. They paid for me to visit them. They think I came back to help sort out our difficulties. Where is your motel located? Just off post. In fact, I should be there by now. She looked around, walked over to the coffee table, pulled a pen out of her purse, sat down, signed the divorce papers without reading them, and left. I put the coffee cups away and went upstairs to bed. When I woke up, it was the middle of Sunday morning. I spent the rest of the day thinking. I took the divorce papers to my attorney on Monday, and he filed them. I went to the housing authority and told them I was moving out of the neighborhood and into an apartment out of town. 6 months later, I was divorced. Neither the court nor I had heard from Lydia. As a result, she got nothing but her car and everything else she took. A copy of the final judgment was mailed to her parents' address in Pennsylvania. I've been thinking a lot about who Lydia cheated with. She never told me who he was or how the affair started. It wasn't just that she cheated and got pregnant that made me angry, it was that she defended the bastard and wouldn't tell me who he was. The only thing she told me was that it only lasted 1 weekend. Fortunately, I was so busy at work that I didn't have time to think about anything else. I also didn't have time for a social life. There was one officer who worked with me that I became friends with and spent at least 1 night a week having dinner with him and his family. In my imagination, they were the perfect military family, husband, wife, 2 kids, 2 cars, and a beautiful home. They seemed to have everything. Of course, being a military family, they had to move periodically, picking up their kids from one school and putting them in another, and facing all the other hardships of military life. Civilian families tend to grow up in the same neighborhood with the same friends over time, but there are exceptions. Families in some industries, such as oil, move as often or even more often than military families. Anyway, Major George and Maran Johnson seemed perfect, and I loved spending time with them and playing with their children. The son was 10 years old, and the daughter was 8. I don't know what typical children are, but these 2 seemed quite well off, so I decided they were typical. George and I were talking one night after dinner. TDWI came up, and we discussed their pros and cons. Of course, they were necessary, and we knew it, but most business trips took us away from our families, those of us who had them, and we felt we spent enough time away from them that we didn't count the business trips. This topic came up because he was selected to attend a security seminar at Fort Hood. He was scheduled to leave in 2 weeks. The next day, I went to see our commander. "Sir, is there any reason I can't go to the seminar instead of Major Johnson?" "Not really," the general replied. "Just figured he had a little more experience in the field than you, but if you go, it'll work." "Good. He and his wife will be celebrating their 12th wedding anniversary, and it would be nice if they celebrated it together." "Well, Major Sadler, I didn't know you were a romantic," he said, laughing. 2 weeks later, I was back at Fort Hood, where Lydia and I were living when her daughter was born. Usually, military seminars are pretty intense, but this one was relaxed. We were divided into groups of 3 to work on a project. It turned out that there were 6 groups of 3, and there were 2 left, the major from Alaska and myself. We developed a close friendship almost immediately. It seemed like we'd known each other all our lives. His name was Keith Franklin, and as I said, he was stationed in Alaska at Fort Wright, the coldest base in the U.S. Army. But he loved it there. He was a computer genius, and we were so far ahead of everyone else that we had to slow down and wait for them to catch up. On Friday of the first week, we had lunch at the O Club. He told me about his personal life. He cheated on his wife, and she divorced him. She is now living with some civilian and his 2 children, calling the other man daddy. Of all the bad things divorce brings, I always thought it was the hardest to take when your kids call the other man daddy. Toward the end of lunch, I laid out my story too. When I finished, he had a strange look in his eyes. "You don't know who the man she had an affair with is?" "No, she didn't tell me." "And that was here in Hood?" "Yes." 5 years ago. "It's almost 6. Blonde hair and blue eyes, that's what she said." "Come with me." We went to the Manpower Center. Everyone assigned to Fort Hood had to go through it. We walked right into the HR director's office. She saw us, stood up, and went around her desk to give Keith a hug. She looked to be about 60 years old and had a sparkle in her eyes. I liked her, and I hadn't even talked to her yet. "Aunt Lucy, this is Fred Sadler," Keith said, shaking my hand. "Hello," I said. "Ah, Mrs. Healy's nameplate on her desk read Mrs. Healy," Keith began. "Call me Aunt Lucy, everyone does," she interrupted. "Aunt Lucy," began Keith, "do you remember the fair-haired blue-eyed officer who may have been here about 6 years ago?" She thought for a few seconds. "No, but I don't always see everyone who passes through here." "They all have to, but that doesn't mean I see them." She thought some more. "Fred Sadler, you were here around that time, weren't you?" "I remember that name." "Yes, my wife and I were here." I said. I looked at Kit as if asking how she remembered that. Keith looked at me. "Aunt Lucy has a Sam, and she can remember just about anything. She's read, seen, or been involved with, that includes people. She can remember everyone she's ever met." "Sam?" I asked. "Yes, supreme autobiographical memory," Aunt Lucy interrupted. "It's a state of being or a curse," Keith continued. "Very few people have it. Aunt Lucy is Fort Hood's institutional memory, especially when it comes to personnel matters. Isn't that right, Aunt Lucy?" Unfortunately, I looked at her, then at Keith, then back at her. "You remember everything. Everything that happens to me personally." "Jesus," I said. "How do you have room for all this?" "We don't know. It's just always there," Aunt Lucy replied. Does it have any downsides? I asked.